the f... In my last video, I said that isometric ARPGs are my favorite genre. I've also been following the development of Minecraft for over a decade. So obviously when I heard that Mojang was going to release Minecraft Dungeons, I knew I was going to have to give it a try. I've been pretty critical of Mojang in other videos, and I'm going to be pretty critical of them in this video, and it's one of the things that people seem to be the most mad about whenever it comes up, so I think it might be a good idea to go over why I am the way that I am when it comes to talking about Mojang as a developer. For some reason, there's still this idea floating around on the internet that Mojang is some kind of cute indie studio. I mean, come on, they did Minecraft. The reality is that Mojang is owned by Microsoft and is at the helm of the most successful and one of the most influential video games of all time. They have access to an enormous pool of resources and have the kind of leverage that most development teams only dream of. Mojang isn't Team Cherry making Hollow Knight, they aren't Heart Machine making Hyper Light Drifter, and they aren't Toby Fox making Undertale. I think they need to be held to a little bit higher of a standard. I'm hard on Mojang because they should be able to take it. Once you've given a piece of your life force to Microsoft, installed the launcher, and you can actually get into the game, you're treated to some classic ARPG mechanics. It's got an isometric perspective, it's got hordes of enemies, and it has items with modifiers. You get where this is going. The goal, I think, of Minecraft Dungeons was to convert the core combat system of Minecraft into an ARPG. There are probably some aliens in deep space picking up this video that haven't played Minecraft before, so for those guys, I'm going to do a little bit of a reminder on how Minecraft's combat system functions on a mechanical level. This is the Minecraft inventory screen. We've all seen it, but let's actually think about what's going on here. We've got 4 armor slots, we have an offhand slot over here, and down here we have the 10 quick slots that basically function as a main hand slot. Once you've played Minecraft all the way to the end game, you get something like this. All of your armor is customized with enchantments. You use a bow or a shield in your offhand, and you use a sword, or maybe an axe if you're a hipster, in your main hand. The way combat actually shakes out sort of looks like this. You run around and use a mix of your range and melee attacks depending on certain variables, and maybe if you're feeling really wild, you might use some items to help you out, like dropping some TNT as a goof, or using flint to set enemies on fire. It's very easy to see how you could convert this system into an ARPG. Most ARPGs have several item slots, most of them have item modifiers, which could easily be swapped out for Minecraft-style enchantments, and most of them have some sort of spell or ability system that could take the place of using items. This is the first area where Minecraft Dungeons severely misses the mark. This is the Minecraft Dungeons inventory screen. The first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that we now have 3 equipment slots instead of 6. 1 for a melee weapon, 1 for a ranged weapon, and 1 to act as your single armor slot. And then down here we have 3 artifact slots. Artifacts basically function as spells and abilities would in any game. Use them to cast spells like this, or stun enemies, or whatever. So what's going on here? Well, we kept the hybridization of melee and ranged combat, so that makes sense. We kept the idea of using items during combat, and turned them into artifact slots. We converted the enchantment system into item modifiers, which is good. We cut the amount of inventory slots in half from 6 to 3, but if we count the artifact slots, that makes 6 slots. So if we can enchant all 6 of these items, and the enchantments are varied and interesting enough, then this should be great. It is now my duty as a world-famous YouTuber to inform you that this is not the case. Artifacts don't drop with enchantments, so now we're down to 3 items with modifiers, and that makes things pretty limited. At this point in the video, I should probably address the fact that Minecraft Dungeons is very obviously a more casual game aimed at a younger audience. This is fine. I don't mind casual games, and I didn't go into Minecraft Dungeons expecting it to be Path of Exile. I understand the place of casual games in the ecosystem of the medium, and if you watch my worst video of all time, the 2018 Halloween special, you'll see that I gave fucking Costume Quest a positive review. I don't have a problem with this kind of game. Not only that, but there is a precedent in place for this genre to be simplified and casual. It's called Fate, and it was an extremely successful game. My problem here is that Mojang took an already really simple system and made it even more simple for a reason I can't quite figure out, and it definitely hurts the final product. Not only is there less equipment slots, but there are less enchantments per item, shields don't even exist, and the enchantment system is in some ways also massively simplified. For example, Minecraft has an enchantment for fire protection, blast protection, projectile protection, and just normal protection. Minecraft Dungeons just has normal protection in a genre that famously uses several different damage types. It's really hard to look at this sort of downgrade in complexity as anything other than poorly thought out. Kids are smart enough to handle a game that actually has content. Usually I don't take the time to try and talk about other ways something in a game could have been done, because I think it's a waste of time, and I'm just a hack reviewer, so what right do I have to tell developers what they should have done in their game? But in this case, it's so glaringly obvious how this should have been executed, I'm going to make an exception. Let's assume that we're going to stick with the enchantment system present in Minecraft Dungeons. So each item has a pool of possible enchantments and can have up to 3 of them at a time. This is a little more simplistic than original Minecraft, but that's okay because our goal here is to make a game that isn't overly complicated. First, use all 4 equipment slots. Give helmets, armor, and legs the same enchantment pool, and give boots some extra enchantments that deal with movement, like in the original game. Very simple. Keep a main hand and an offhand slot, and don't remove shields. This means you still get to do the dual wield stuff you want to do, but you also get shields so that carrying around a one-handed weapon doesn't look weird as hell. Either keep the idea of a ranged weapon slot, or just make it so that ranged weapons only take up one hand slot like in the original game. Then do artifacts exactly the same. Nothing I've said here is even remotely ambitious, and it would still be one of the most, if not the most simple ARPGs to ever exist. It's very hard for me to believe that something similar to this didn't exist as a prototype at some point during development. The gear and enchantment system that Minecraft Dungeons has in place just isn't enough to really be interesting to anyone. I've said it once, but I'll say it again. Kids are smarter than this. God, I'm an adult complaining about Minecraft on the internet. How is this a legitimate career path in 2020? So now we are in a situation where what seems to have been the game's initial premise has completely fallen apart. But there is one spot where Mojang's effort to port Minecraft into an ARPG actually worked. And that's the hybridization of ranged and melee combat. In Minecraft Dungeons, you have 2 resources. One is your health, and the other one is your arrows. You can't heal very often for most of the game, and you don't get arrows to drop that often. So combat becomes a balancing act between falling back to use your ranged attacks when your health gets low, and conserving your ammo with melee attacks when you start running low. Later in the game, once you get better items, you can sort of build to focus on one or the other, but in general, even tanky melee characters will come up against a situation where an enemy is strong enough to force them back, especially if you're playing at higher difficulties, and eventually a ranged character will need to conserve ammo. And now that we have the game's premise out of the way, I'm going to talk about something that I've never talked about in a video before, something called game feel. Game feel is exactly what it sounds like. It's how a game feels to play. Minecraft Dungeons has terrible game feel. Isometric RPGs like this play best when they play fast and low friction. You want your character to move quickly, attack quickly, and generally glide through the game. As much as I hate to admit this, Diablo 3 does this the best and is a good example of what I'm talking about. Minecraft Dungeons handles this pretty terribly for a lot of reasons. First of all, your character's base movement feels too slow. This can be mitigated by some artifacts, but then you are compromising between movement speed buffs or something more interesting, which is unfortunate. The base attack speed on almost every melee weapon is also painfully slow, and the only attack speed buff is this mushroom. There are also swiftness potions that drop every once in a while that will give you a burst of speed for a time. What all of this together creates is gameplay where you get these really satisfying bursts of speed, where you're rampaging through enemies and feeling really good, but then end in a crash where the monster energy drink wears off and you go back to feeling like you're moving through soup. There are also large portions of the map that don't have enemies that make this feel even worse. As odd as it sounds, I think this movement issue is what hurts Minecraft Dungeons the most. Because of, in spite how ridiculously simplified the game is, these moments feel really fun. If the character's base movement was buffed, the attack speed on basically every weapon was buffed, and maintaining this speed was more practical, it would go a long way to making this game feel good to play, even if the enemies were rebalanced to compensate. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of game feel is how item drops in this game work. Item drops are a core component of this genre. You can't make a game like this without a loot system. You've probably already noticed from the gameplay footage, but in Minecraft Dungeons, items don't drop very often. I actually think this is kind of an interesting direction to go in, and let me explain why. Here's a scene from Path of Exile. I've just cleared out a bunch of enemies, and what you're seeing is all the items they dropped. How many of these items do you think are useful? The answer is fucking 0. Because of this, I don't think the idea of making items drop less often, but be more useful, is necessarily a bad thing. The problem is, when they drop isn't handled well. Chests are fine, and you can usually expect an item out of a chest. That's good. Every once in a while they drop from an enemy, and that's fine. But bosses aren't a guaranteed drop, and that feels terrible. It's a long-standing tradition in games that bosses equal better stuff. I should be excited when I see the redstone golem, not annoyed that there is a damage sponge between me and the rest of the game. This is also a problem with the game's enchanted mobs. Enchanted monsters in Minecraft Dungeons are the equivalent of rare monsters in a game of the same genre. They have modifiers on them and are significantly more difficult than normal. They don't spawn very often and basically function as a mini-boss. They seem to have about the same drop rate as normal monsters, which again, feels terrible. Enchanted monster packs should be dropping at least 1 item per encounter to make these fights feel rewarding instead of like a chore. I'm entirely serious when I say that if all of these game feel problems were improved, that probably would have been enough for me to psychologically give this game a much more positive review, even if nothing else was changed. That's how much of an impact this kind of thing makes, especially in this genre. I just want to go fast. Let me go fast. Now that we've talked a bit about items, it's time to get into how itemization functions, but in order to do that, I need to explain character progression first. In Minecraft Dungeons, when you get a level, you get an enchantment point. You can then use your enchantment points to unlock enchantments on items that drop. These enchantment points can be reclaimed to be put on another item, which makes sense because in this sort of game, you want to be able to experiment with different items often and figure out which ones are better for which situation and that sort of thing. The problem is, you can only get the points back by destroying the item. This leads to extremely frustrating situations where the only real way to test if one item is better than another one you have is to destroy it and hope that the next item will be better after it's fully enchanted. And sometimes it won't be, and you'll need to sit around and wait for something better to drop. This incentivizes the player to be really careful about what items they use instead of experimenting with a wide range of items, and that feels really counterintuitive to the core idea of Minecraft, which is to let the player be creative. There probably should have been an NPC that would disenchant items for a small emerald fee or something. I've already mentioned how 3 equipment slots and not being able to enchant artifacts is bad, so I won't dwell on these points, but I will dwell a little bit on item balance. Item balance in this game is terrible, and that's something that is extremely difficult to pull off in a single-player PvE game. There are some weapons that are just clearly, and by an incredibly huge margin, better than others. For example, heavy slow weapons like this are without exception terrible. They feel bad to use because of how slow they attack, and they almost always do less DPS than their faster counterparts. Second, all weapons have different attack animations and patterns, which is actually a really cool idea that you don't see in this genre very often. The problem here is that some of these are significantly better than others, to the point where using anything else feels stupid. One of the best examples is probably the double axe. The double axe has a built-in area attack that hits in a 360 around your character, which means that you can spend all 3 enchantment slots on just buffing its damage, instead of having to waste them on something like Shockwave to get area damage. It's just objectively the best weapon in terms of how quickly it can clear enemies and how good it feels to play. Enchantments also suffer from comparable balancing issues. It becomes very clear very quickly which enchantments are the best, and there's no real room to experiment here. This makes the enchantment system even more boring than it already was, and once again is really antithetical to the idea of Minecraft being creative and giving the player a lot of choices. This item system also causes a pretty bad issue with pacing. As you play, you will level and get enchantment points, but it will pretty quickly get to a point where you have enchantment points just sitting around that you can't actually do anything with. This makes leveling feel like hot garbage. You can use these to enchant new weapons to experiment with to be more sure they'll be an upgrade, but most of the time, you don't quite have enough to fully enchant them for testing. Now at this point you might be thinking, but Jacob, the goal of the developers was for you to have different sets of enchanted items for different situations. Well, if that were true, it would be nice, but Minecraft Dungeons has no way to quickly swap your items other than opening this huge inventory screen during combat, finding the items you want, equipping them, and then exiting the menu. The idea of having different equipment sets without a quick swap hotkey is pretty laughable. There also isn't enough enchantment points to realistically have more than one extra enchanted item for the overwhelming majority of the game. This game's entire item system basically just feels bad from the ground up. I've spent a lot of time slam dunking on this game for this video, so I think it's time we take a break and talk about some of the good things this game does, because there are a lot of good things it does, which is part of the reason why it feels so frustrating to play. The worst kind of bad game is one that is just a couple changes away from being great. First of all, like I mentioned in the game feel section, there are times where the gameplay feels great. The brief moments where you're rampaging through Minecraft zombie hordes feels good. The item hunt, at least on paper, is also great. Having to not only worry about getting that rare unique item, but also getting one to drop with the right enchantments available is a great way to reward players that want to grind, and this genre is all about rewarding the grind. This game also uses an arcade-style level system. Each map in the game is one level, and you get 3 lives. If you die 3 times, you start over. This actually makes the game feel pretty tense if you're playing on a difficulty above your gear level, because there's a constant risk of dying and having to restart from the beginning. I've never really seen this approach in this kind of game before, and I really liked the arcade feel. Minecraft Dungeons also has a lot of secrets to unlock that are very fun to hunt for, and some of them are even extremely difficult to find. And finally, the game is just technically solid. It looks good, it runs well, the lighting is nice, the music is nice. It's obvious that everyone on the dev team in charge of anything creative did a good job. But all of these positive aspects still aren't enough to carry the extremely lackluster game design. Minecraft Dungeons confirmed a suspicion I've had about Mojang as a developer for a long time, and that suspicion is that they're great developers, but terrible designers. Every aspect of development always ends up being good, like the art, or the music, or the aesthetic, but the actual game design always falls short of making any sense. You can see this all over in Minecraft, whether it's how villager trading can be abused for infinite emeralds and experience, or how, by the time you build lodestones to mark areas off for exploration, you're already in the end game and don't really need to explore anymore, or how lodestones are even in the game in the first place when everyone just uses coordinates anyway, or the general snail's pace of Minecraft's development. In the golden age of Minecraft mods, we were getting content hundreds of times more interesting than anything Mojang has ever implemented, and we were getting it more often and from people working for free. It's not really a coincidence that the game that might end up being the tombstone on Minecraft's grave is being developed by a team of former Minecraft modders. It just feels like Mojang has no idea what they're doing in terms of game design, and that's probably because they haven't really made a game as a studio before now. Mojang didn't develop Minecraft, they inherited it. And if you look at Minecraft Dungeons in the context of it being Mojang's first game, it starts to make sense that every time they have a choice between interesting game mechanics or slipping on a banana peel, they step on the banana every time. I probably also would have been a lot less harsh on this game if it was actually a finished product, but of course it isn't. There were 2 day 1 DLCs planned at launch. After seeing how short the base game is, I don't really see the excuse for this. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Mojang isn't some small indie studio that needs to release an early access game to get funding. They have the time and the money to develop and release a finished product. Minecraft is a game that can be treated as an ongoing project because it has no point and it has no win condition. It's just a game about building stuff forever. But a normal-ass video game like Minecraft Dungeons doesn't work like that. To be fair, the base game is only $20, so depending on how much the DLCs cost, we're still probably going to be looking at a game around the $40 range, which is pretty good for a shorter indie-style game, but this really should have been dropped as a complete title. Alright, that's my Minecraft Dungeons review. It's not a very good game. Wait until all the DLC is out before you even think about considering to buy it. And if you're a young kid who's the target audience for this game, play something that doesn't insult your intelligence. If you want to see more videos like this one, consider subscribing. Leaving a like and a comment also helps out a lot. Also, I opened a Discord server recently that you can join with a link down in the description, and you would have known about that server 2 weeks ago if you were following me on Twitter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.